The following are time slip stories or glitches in time, where this strange phenomenon happens where a moment from the past spontaneously intrudes on the present through seemingly unexplained means. The following are 5 accounts where people came upon a glitch in the matrix. Mrs. Turrell Clarke. The following incident happened to a Mrs. Turrell Clarke who at the time of her experience lived in Wiseley-cum-Pireford, Surrey in southern England. The woman was on her way to evensong at a local church, Newark Abbey. As she was cycling down the road to the village church, without warning, the road appeared to become a field path along which she walked. Then, coming towards her, she could see a man who appeared to be wearing a peasant dress from the 13th century. As she approached him, he stood to one side to let her pass. At the time of the incident, Mrs. Turrell Clarke was convinced that she was wearing the robes of a nun. About 1 month later, Mrs. Turrell Clarke was in the same parish church singing hymns with 11 other members of the church choir. Then halfway through the singing, she saw the church change to its original structure with dirt floors, lancet windows, altar of stone, but there were no other furnishings. In the centre space, she observed brown-habited monks walking in procession and chanting the same hymn as the choir. At the same time, she knew that she herself was among a group at the rear of the church taking part in the proceedings. The whole experience was momentary, and she later made inquiries about the history of the church. She was informed that the monks that she had observed could not have come from Newark Abbey, as the monks of the time wore black habits and not brown habits. However, in later research, she found that in 1293, the monks of the Abbey of Westminster had been granted the use of the chapel and would have worn brown habits. Had Mrs. Turrell Clarke experienced a time slip, or was she experiencing a past incarnation as a nun in the 13th century? Mrs. R. Eadie. The next case took place in London in 1918, where Mrs. R. Eadie had been staying in Addison Buildings. The building had been converted into flats, which had formerly been an old family house. At the time of the incident, Mrs. Eadie had been nursing a friend who had succumbed to the dreaded Spanish flu, which at the time was ravaging Europe. One night she was sitting on a sofa reading her book in front of the fireplace. As she was about to get up and check on her friend, the fireplace suddenly vanished in front of her, and the room then opened out into a large, high-ceilinged reception room. The room was now filled with ladies and gentlemen. The men were wearing knee-length, full-skirted coats of many colours with white knee breeches, white silk stockings with black-buckled shoes. Their hair was powdered. She also observed some men wearing 3-cornered black hats. The women were exquisitely dressed in pastel-shaded satins with bodices cut low and tight with full skirts. The dresses had panels of lace in front. The hair was high and powdered. Patches and powder were worn on the face. Everyone she was observing seemed to be covered in jewels. Mrs. Eadie could only stare in amazement at what was taking place in front of her. Then in a split second, it all vanished, and the room shrank to its normal size. Had Mrs. Eadie suddenly entered into a time slip, showing the past opulence of a once rich family that had occupied the building? Or was she observing a residual haunting where the walls had absorbed a past energy? Jane Blakely. A woman by the name of Jane Blakely told about an unusual experience she'd had when she was a child and been taken on a holiday to North Devon in southern England. They were passing through a gate near Croyd, a village on the west-facing coastline of North Devon, and Jane remarked to her parents that there was a pond just ahead. However, there was no pond ahead, but after making inquiries, found that there had once been a pond that had been dug by American forces during the Second World War, but was later filled in. Strangely, the pond that had been built and later filled in happened before Jane had even been born, and Jane had never before been to the village of Croyd and had no knowledge of the district. How did she know about the pond ever existing? Lucy Carr. In 1951, a woman by the name of Lucy Carr told of an experience she'd had in Norwich in the east coast of England. At the time of the incident, Lucy had been living in Norfolk for 2 years and had occasionally visited Norwich, but was not familiar with the city or its history. In the centre of the city of Norwich is a shopping centre called the Royal Arcade, and one late autumn afternoon Lucy decided to go for a walk in the arcade to go window shopping. She found the shops brightly lit and attractive, and was particularly interested in a shop that sold linen goods and other various items displayed in the shop window. Lucy then returned home and later that year returned to the arcade with a 13-year-old daughter with the intention of buying Christmas gifts of linen. Lucy had clearly remembered the location of the shop she had visited earlier in the year and immediately headed to where it was located, but instead of a linen shop, found a burnt-out shell. Confused, she walked away and headed towards another shop in the main street that sold similar goods. As she was about to leave the shop, she casually said to the shop assistant, "I thought your shop was in the arcade." And the assistant replied, "It was, and we were there before the war, but we were burnt out by an incendiary bomb during an air raid." Yet Lucy Carr had visited the shop just a few months previously, and it was still in its original location and brilliantly lit. What would have happened if she had decided to enter the shop and purchase some linen? What would she have experienced? Neil Allison. In the following incident, an RAF officer by the name of Air Vice Marshal Neil Allison and his wife were on holiday in Invergarry, Inverness, Scotland. The couple was staying at the only hotel in town and were fortunate enough to encounter good weather for the 2 days they intended to stay there. They had decided to take a casual walk that was not too strenuous, as his wife was not strong at the time, and they did not want anything that was too taxing on her health. They asked the front desk for directions and were told that if they walked beside the nearby river, they would eventually come to a bridge and then return along the far bank. They set off on their short journey by the river alongside Scots firs that filled with bright sunlight. They had not gone too far when the husband spotted a wooden trestle bridge over the river. He then informed his wife that there was only a short distance to go, and as they emerged from amongst the trees, there was no bridge to be seen, and would have to walk another half-mile along the river before an actual bridge appeared. The bridge was not wooden but was an iron trestle bridge, which they crossed before heading back to the hotel. By the time they reached the hotel, Neil was tired and his wife was totally exhausted, whereupon Neil Allison complained that he had been misled regarding the closeness of the bridge. The front desk appeared unperturbed about their ordeal and said, "Ah yes, the old wooden trestle bridge. It was washed away many years ago. Did you go over the iron bridge?" Had Air Vice Marshal Neil Allison for a split second seen a ghost bridge, or had he momentarily been caught in a time slip?